Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors are able to talk about their books, how they write them, how they publish them, and how they market them. We are on Facebook. Just look for The Writer's Dream. We're also on YouTube. You have to look for my name, Linda Maria Frank, and then just click on it and the videos will come up. We've interviewed about 125 plus guests, and if you're interested in how to write, publish, and market, or you're also interested in getting some good books from local authors, this is the channel to tune into. If you want to contact me to be on the show or to ask me a question, please contact me through my email, which is my initials, lmf217@hotmail.com. Today's guest is Rosemary McKinley, and Rosemary, like me, is a teacher. She taught history, and she turned writer. And the book that she is going to feature today is Captain Henry Green. She's written 2 other books, Glimpses of the North Fork and Islands, and The Wampum Exchange, which I find an intriguing title. She's also published articles in a bunch of periodicals, which I find very impressive because there are a whole lot of them. Fate Magazine, The Good Old Days Magazine, Newsday, Wormwood Press, Clarity, Lucidity, Italy Mag, LI Canvas, The Ultimate Teacher, that's us, Writing After Retirement, and Whispering Angel Books. So what led you to writing, Rosemary?
Well, as you know, most writers are writing, most teachers are writing all the time, and so I wrote mostly nonfiction because I was presenting history, and I wanted to present it in an interesting, I should say, intriguing way, because kids usually tell you how boring it is. Yes. So I would always have these asides, these little stories, and I still never wanted to be a writer until I went to Columbia Teachers College for 2 summers because I wanted to teach. I wanted to become a better writing teacher in 6th grade. And I still didn't want to become a writer until my mom passed away. And it was a profound moment for me in which I decided I wanted to do something else with my life. And that's how I began my second career as a writer.
Well, I find many of the authors that I interview start out, not all of them obviously, start out as teachers, but my story is very similar in that I wanted to make it interesting. So I would write little stories. I taught forensic science, so I would write little case studies and they would have to solve them. And I like some of the case studies. And I like Nancy Drew, and I thought, I think I'll write a book. So I did the same thing you did. I didn't know anything about writing a book, so I took a course. I took a couple of courses, and that seems to be the pathway of teachers. So what kind of pieces were finally published in these periodicals before we get to your books?
Okay.
Did you start to write those first?
I took a course, it was called Taproot for 55 and over writers, and I just started writing glimpses of my life. And I actually have a memoir, but it hasn't been published yet. But that's how I started. I wrote just a page on different chapters in my life. And the instructor was Maxwell Wheat, he's pretty well known on Long Island. He just passed away. He was very, very supportive. And so I branched into writing poetry, which he was promoting. And so I started submitting. That's how it all started in 2003, and I received a ton of rejections, a ton. But I also received at least 1 acceptance a year for a few years. And
that's actually pretty
good. That kept me going because I did hang up my hat for a while. I got very discouraged.
Yeah, well, I think you were very brave, actually, to submit to publishers. But of course, in 2003, we were just starting to get into self-publishing. Self-publishing was becoming more respected, and because by the time I published, it was 2010. So it was, right. In that period of time, it became acceptable. It became something that was doable. Yes. And now I wouldn't do it any other way, but that's just me. So that really opened the door for you to a publisher who would publish your books.
Yes.
And then you published The Wampum Exchange?
No.
No, this first.
And This story is the best story because I had been receiving rejections, a couple of acceptances. I sent a short story that I wrote about a woman in 1905 in Manhattan to History Press. They sent me a rejection, but a very nice rejection, and the next day the editor asked me to write a book for them. This book.
They're Arcadia Press now, aren't
Now,
they?
they've merged.
Yeah.
And I thought everybody in the whole world heard me screaming when I got that email, because that is a writer's dream.
Yes, yes.
And so anyway, but I didn't know how to. There's 100 vintage pictures. I didn't know anything about doing this book, but I decided that if I said no, I'd never get a proposal
No, it was a
like
tremendous break.
that. It was. So I got help. I knew I could get help, and because I had to acquire the pictures, but they had to be formatted and sized, but the writing part was, I could do that very easily.
Yeah.
But I started researching the North Fork, and that led me to come up with an idea for the second book, which is historical fiction.
Well, I just find the title so intriguing. What is it about, briefly?
Okay. Basically, it's about a Native American boy and a white settler in 1650, and they meet because Daniel finds a bracelet, a wampum bracelet, and so this whole, he has no idea what it is, and so there's a whole explanation of wampum because the Dutch used it and the English used it differently than the Native Americans. Fort Korchog was a wampum-producing settlement in Cutchogue, and anyway, so the whole story is around how people lived at the time and how that was involved in their lives.
So, and you are really a Long Island girl.
I
You are totally
Yes.
a Long Island girl.
Yes.
You're not from Brooklyn, which is on Long Island. Most people don't think so.
Yes.
But, you're from Seacliff?
Seacliff, I grew up in Seacliff and Glen Cove, and then we moved to Bethpage, and
You moved inland.
I moved in. Yeah, that was very upsetting because we liked the water, but we were near Jones Beach.
There you go.
It wasn't far.
Yeah, I'm 15 minutes from Joe. I
Yeah,
love
we're,
Jones Beach.
okay, so we're 25, but and we spent summers at Jones Beach. But when we bought a house here 22 years ago, I just could not believe the history out here, and that's what just intrigued me, and I started researching.
Yeah. Now, what were
And
you?
writing.
You taught in Bethpage?
I taught in Manhasset, and then I taught in Bethpage High School, and then the middle school.
Right.
Reading, writing, and social sciences,
Yeah,
social
social
history,
studies.
social studies.
Yeah. Okay, so tell us about Captain Henry Green.
So Captain Henry Green he's highlighted at the Horton Point Lighthouse, and the two docents asked me to write the book. They gave me an idea for the third book. When I started researching, he's not very well known, so it was very difficult to find information. But I just kept looking, and actually the Whitaker collection in the Southold Library had a lot of information. And then I came to East Hampton to look up the Long Island collection in East Hampton Library also, because I just wanted to find as much as I could. I decided to write it as historical fiction because I couldn't find everything that I wanted about him. But it is based on fact.
Now, the people at the lighthouse recommended, how did they know about him? From a ship's log? Or?
Oh, that's a good story. The Green family, because he lived in his later years they call it Peconic, we call it Cutchogue now. They donated all these. I didn't bring my pictures. They donated his sea chest, his a jewelry case that he made for his wife on during one of his journeys. There's his portrait. There's a lot of his artifacts are there, and the Green family china is there that they donated. So there's a lot there from the family.
Yeah, that's a nice museum
It
at the
is.
lighthouse there.
It's
So
very
they knew
small.
about him. And
Yes.
what was it about him that made him, because you call him an ordinary man with an extraordinary
Okay.
story. So what's extraordinary about
Well,
him?
what's extraordinary is when I started doing the research, first of all, he started as a lowly green hand. I always have to say that. He didn't know anything about whaling or sailing, and he worked his way up to become a sea captain. And he was the first with his brother-in-law to spot the Amistad,
Ooh.
the infamous slave ship. So that's when I was looking at all this information, I couldn't believe that. There are articles written about it, so I know that he and his brother-in-law were the first to spot that ship. He talked to the mutineers on the beach, and then the
Where
third,
did he spot the ship?
Culloden Point, which is between Sag Harbor and Montauk,
Okay.
in there. And
And it was at anchor?
the
Or it
ship was out in the water, and the mutineers were on the beach with money, but they had no food, and they couldn't communicate, and they were trying. Henry and his brother-in-law, Duke Fordham, were trying to communicate to figure out what they wanted. And then the USS Washington spotted this, and they came, and then they took over. And then they boarded the ship, and they found the two owners, Montez and Ruiz. Then they got the whole story. But it took a long time because they couldn't understand
The language of the
language.
slaves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that
And
was.
they had killed a couple of people on the ship. So anyways, I don't want to tell you the whole story. You have to read the book.
Yes,
But
of
it's-
course. Of course.
But it's fascinating that he was the first to spot it, and they put a lien against the Amistad, and his lien was not accepted by the courts, but he and the Ruiz and Montez, theirs was not accepted. The USS Washington's was. They received a compensation. It was because they took over the ship, and whatever they had to do, they had to move the ship.
Yeah, well, that's a maritime law.
Yes,
Maritime law is that if the
salvage.
if the ship is captainless, it's yours.
It's yours. And so it was, but they only were involved for a short time. But anyway, it's fascinating. John Quincy Adams gets involved, and I find it fascinating. And then the third fact about him that's also fascinating, which I didn't know anything about, was that he was persuaded to captain a ship of sea captains to go to look for gold in California from Greenport.
So they had hit, at that time, there was no Panama Canal.
No, they had to go all the way beyond Cape Horn and go all the way around. It took over a year.
Mm-hmm. They're lucky they made it.
Yes, and the ship was old and waterlogged, and his journal on the Sabina it's online at Mystic Seaport. I have part of that in the book, but it reveals a lot about Henry. He was he was God-fearing. He was very strict, which he learned. I'm sure he learned you how to be, and just a lot about him.
Determined.
Very determined. And I don't think he really wanted to go. I have that in the book. I think his wife was, enough, Henry. You've been out for all these years. Stay home.
So when he got to California, was he able to cash in on the gold rush?
Well, this is the other part that's interesting. The Southampton Mining Company put the money up, and they had to get a percentage of the gold if they found any.
Right.
And I think they were just so disillusioned because these were mostly people who were whalers.
Mm-hmm.
They were very adventurous, and they were hiking, and they had to provide their own water, and there was so many people dying of dysentery. I think it was a fiasco, and one of Henry's very good friends died there, and I think that he just didn't want any part of it. But he is a very responsible person, and so he had to oversee the all the cargo had to be sold off, the ship had to be sold off, and so he had to stay for all that. But I don't think he really had his heart set in gold.
To find gold.
Yeah, to
Right.
be in the gold rush.
So did he make it back to Greenport?
He came back overland on a stagecoach. And you know, somebody pointed out in my book talks that it was probably because the Sabina was in such bad shape and they had to leave it that he had to come back.
Sure.
With his son. He had 2 sons with him. They were also sea captains.
Well, he probably, any accounts that I've read about making that voyage around the Cape, either Cape Horn or the Cape of Good Hope, the winds in that part of the globe are so treacherous that he probably realized that the boat would just never make it back. He was probably fortunate to make it one way.
Yeah.
So you really did have a lot of information about him. Do you like doing research?
Yes, I love doing research.
Me too.
That's the history part of me. See, you're the science.
Yeah, but I like to
person.
do the research too, because with science there's a lot of research. When I did my last book, which was about a Grumman plane that was used during World War II called the Avenger, I went to the Cradle of Aviation Museum and I went into their archives, and I could get all this stuff on the internet. But to be there in the archives and open up the blueprints for the plane, the real
Yeah.
blueprints, was very exciting to me.
Yeah. Well, I spent time for the second book at the Southold Indian Museum, and I had to do that. I had to actually go in and delve into their archives, which are not very organized because it's
Well, neither
all,
were
yeah,
these.
these are volunteers. But and funny thing is, when I started my research on the Korchog Indians, when I went to the Southold Indian Museum, I believe she's more than a curator, but she told me all my information was wrong.
Oh,
Because
great.
it didn't go back far enough. So I had to rip it all up, and then I did a lot of research there, and they did have a lot because it was excavated. Archaeologists had come in, and so there's more information today where they can actually date the scientists.
Right,
They
well,
can date
sure,
it. And
carbon
they couldn't-
dating.
The carbon dating they couldn't do when I was, from the period that I was doing the research.
Yeah, doing historical research today, really, science is a great help because
is.
of carbon dating. They also do something called isotopic analysis, which can tell you exactly where something is from. Not how old, but where, and DNA, of course. So, but my one question about this is that the research that you did was basically here on Long Island.
Yes.
Did it ever lead you? Was there ever anything about these people anywhere else? Did your research lead you like to New York City or Brooklyn or
No.
California?
But I will say, no. But I did. I went on the New Bedford, Massachusetts site for whaling because that was the top whaling town.
Yeah.
And Sag Harbor was the second, which I found out. But I did find a lot of information, but on the website. I didn't actually go there.
Mhm.
And when I studied the California, that whole research area, it was all online. That was online.
Yeah, well, I would imagine that making it historical fiction was a wise decision because you had enough meat for the character, but then you could play with everything else,
Yeah.
sort of.
Being that I'm a history person, I like the facts to be true, and the story can be, you can
Yeah.
elaborate, but I wanted the facts to be true. So about whaling and how
Sure.
dangerous it was and how exciting it was to certain people, and so that it was fun.
Sure, it's exciting to do the research. So we talked about your writing, your publishing, marketing.
Oh, gee.
I know, marketing is, everyone has the same reaction. What do you find that is most successful as far as marketing is
Well,
concerned?
I know, I read a lot of writers' newsletters, and I read a lot about these tips that people give you, and they're all good, except that because I'm in the history niche, I call it, so, and it's local history, so I go to a store with the book in my hand and a smile on my face. And that does do, that has helped me very much. It doesn't work all the time.
No, I know.
You know that. But, you know, social media is great, and getting your name out there is great, but I think especially because my books are more local history, that it's good to talk to people about your writing. And but I send to libraries. I'm always sending my information to libraries. They are wonderful in highlighting authors, and bookstores. Some yes, some, you know, it hasn't happened. And
I'll give you a little tip.
okay,
if you want one.
I'd like a tip.
Okay. What I find really helpful is to come up with maybe, I have 7 of them, but maybe 3 lectures, and then go to the program directors of your assisted living and your
okay.
senior, you know, your senior colonies, if you want to call them that. I mean, Long Island is
There's plenty of
paved
them.
with
That's
them.
a great tip.
Yes, it is a great tip because, first of all, they pay you. I said that, you know, sotto voce. But, yeah,
Oh,
and they
that's a
love
good
it.
tip.
They love it because the seniors, many of them have careers that you excite what they did in their lives, and they like to hear about new things. They love writers. So, and you have local history. I think you would be a great hit.
That's a
Make a
great
PowerPoint.
suggestion. I have 2 PowerPoints. I've done a lot of book talks in libraries and historical museums.
You did
The other-
Cold Spring Harbor?
Yes, I actually have. But the other thing, and this is for other writers,